So, well, let's, leverage this time. And anyone else on the room, you can also, if you're interested, you can also join with audio and video, however you prefer. The end goal of this session is going to be really having that conversation with Eva, learning from her experience, getting that guidance, and trying to see how we can apply her experience and learning in our careers. So my name is Farza. I'm helping here as a facilitator, but I have a lot of questions myself as well. So really trying to learn from Eva's experience. Anyone else who's interested to join with your audio or video on, please do that. This is really an interactive session. The rest of this is really for you guys to get your answers from Eva. And then if you don't feel like putting on video or audio, feel free to, ask your questions on the chat as well. All right. So I'm going to start with my own questions. Okay, so Tina is telling me that I need to click on the moderation panel to let people on camera. So anyone who is interested to go on camera, let me know. And we can try that. All right, so let me ask a question. So one of the things that it really has been coming up for me and with people in the start of their career is the imposter syndrome. Have you ever felt imposter syndrome, and how did you respond to that?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think for sure in the early days at Borrowell, I definitely felt imposter syndrome. As I've shared before, my background prior to Borrowell which is a fintech company. Our mission is to help people help make financial stability possible for everybody. I didn't have a background in tech. I didn't have a background at any startup before Borrowell, and I didn't even have a background in financial services. So I really didn't have, what I thought was the relevant background to be a co-founder or to start a company. So I think I very much felt like, oh, look, what am I doing here? I don't have the right background. The thing that I think is super interesting, and I've shared this before, is that it feels like because of stereotypes in our culture, nobody doubts that a 20-year-old straight white male college dropout could be a startup founder. Do you know what I mean? It just seems like sort of normal. That's like what Bill Gates did. It's what Mark Zuckerberg did. So, I mean, they had tech backgrounds, but nobody doubts that someone with, very little work experience could be the founder of a company. But I had 15 years of work experience. Like, I had been a management consultant. I'd done a whole bunch of things in my career. I'd done like quite a technical master's degree that was like very quant heavy. And so I do think it's interesting, again, like what our culture would tell us versus sometimes what we tell ourselves.
Thank you. And so how did you kind of like handle that? Like what helped you go through it?
Yeah, I think that a lot of my career, if there's been one theme, it's that I don't think I was ever qualified for any of the jobs that I did. So I was actually pretty comfortable being like uncomfortable. I started my career out as a consultant, and you go into these companies where it's like, okay, it's an electrical utility or it's a railroad, and you're going in being paid as like an external consultant, and you know nothing about the industry. So I think that kind of training and background was super helpful. It's like, I asked lots of questions. I wasn't shy about that. I was like, look, if I don't ask questions, I'm not going to learn. So it maybe wasn't always external. I would, ask my other co-founders, or I would do like a bunch of research. But I was pretty open about asking questions because I sort of felt like if I didn't ask, I would never learn. And even though it was admitting I didn't know, I thought it was better to find out than to stay in the dark. So I do think that like not being afraid to ask questions was sort of like ingrained in me. Okay. I guess I sort of learned throughout my career to just get up to speed fairly quickly and figure out like where I could add value. So I do think it's a skill in of itself to like sort of feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable. It's that growth mindset of like, okay, I don't know this, but what are the key things that I need to learn? How am I defining success? Let's make that very clear with my co-founder. Like, what is it you want me to do? This is what I think it is. Is that right? This is what I'm going to produce by this time. And then, okay, well, how do I do that? I think the Toronto tech community is fantastic as well. there were so many things I needed to get up to speed on, and I just reached out to different people. And I think the community is great because you don't have to know all the answers. It's like, okay, I need to figure this out. How do I do it? And I think I got lots of great advice.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think that's a big key thing. Be comfortable to feel uncomfortable. And you're not alone in that. Like all of us have that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a bad thing, right? I think it definitely, you sort of get used to that like feeling of discomfort, but then I think there's a bit of like exhilaration, right? It's like, I figured this out. It's like, you look back and you're like, this was really hard and I figured that out. And I think that gives you confidence again, and builds that resilience, right? Of remind yourself of the hard things you've done in the past that you didn't know how to do and you figured out. And I think that builds confidence. Like, I can tackle this. Sure, I don't know anything about this. I don't know how to do it, but I figured out things before that I didn't know how to do.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that. And so if you want to say one thing that you've struggled the most in your career and you've overcame it, like what would have that been?
I think one of the things that's tough, and this is specific, I think, to a startup context, but I'm sure applies other places as well, throughout your career, is that often the things that have made you successful up until this point are not the things that will make you successful in the next stage in your career. And I think at Borrowell, this happens probably every 6 months, where it's like, it's a different phase. I've got different responsibilities. But I think even the question that was asked around being an IC or being a manager, like when you transition to being a manager, some of the things that made you successful as an individual contributor are not necessarily the things that are going to make you successful as a manager. So I think that can be hard, is to make that mindset switch. Early on in a startup, I had to be executing on everything or nothing got done. There was no one to delegate to. And I had to, it was like this very broad range of things. It was just go, go, go. If I did that today, it would be a disaster. Like, that's not, we've got, lots of very competent people who know way more than I do. They don't need me to execute. They need me to help coach them into thinking longer term or being more strategic, or, they want the longer term vision. So I think it can be challenging for all of us to say, it's like, okay, I was super successful. This got me here, but I actually have to forget all that and unlearn it and learn a new skill, because that's what I'm going to need to be successful in the next stage of what I want to do.
Yeah, thank you. So, guys, I really hope that I can get people to go join on the video and then have this conversation. So, David, are you requesting to join on the video? Trying to figure out how I can help that. I see the moderation panel, and yep, I can add like anyone who requests here, and I can make the video on. So I see David joined. Awesome.
Hello. Hi, Eva. Hi,
Hey, David.
Yeah, we'll I'll let Tina tackle that. I think we can if somebody requests. I think if somebody, when you're in the screen and you click share screen and audio, Farzaneh should have a button in the bottom that will allow her to let people on.
Yes. Sorry, at the tail end of it. Yes.
Yeah, and I do have that button. There's no one requesting. That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, cool. I actually had a question, Eva, if I may, and it's around entrepreneurship and sort of the challenges, because for those of us who deal with stress at work, I mean, everybody deals with stress, especially during COVID. But entrepreneurs specifically, there's a lot of research and documentation as to how entrepreneurs are more can succumb to depression and mental health issues at an alarming rate, right? So from my very little experience managing teams, I found in COVID it could be extremely stressful, and then you have children on top of that, and there's no sort of divide between work and not only specific to COVID, but just even outside of that, that can be really, really challenging, right? So I know it doesn't work exponentially, but when I look at Borrowell and you've raised money and it's a Canadian fintech and you're this female entrepreneur and there's all these things that layer on top of each other, my question is, how do you find that mental space to make sure that this isn't something that just takes over your life and it's not stressful and you're still able to, keep doing the things that make you happy and keep you sane and present and with your family and friends.
Yeah.
And that's my question. I'll bounce.
Yeah. Okay, great question. I do think that it's important to, I think what David said at the end, it's like to be thoughtful about what kind of life you want to lead, right? It's like even to be a bit more strategic and say like, what do I want my life to look like today? What do I want it to look like in a few years? And presumably it's not just about your career. Presumably there's other things that are important as well, other relationships, other, you know, hobbies potentially. So I think the same way that we might be good about setting goals for the company, I think it's really important to set personal goals across a couple of different categories and at least be mindful of some of those things. I think another thing that's been like helpful for me is, again, like David sort of alluded to this, is like to be present. I think it can be so easy when you're at work to sort of like feel guilty about being away from kids or family, or when you're with your family or friends that you're thinking about work, you're like never really present. And I think that sort of like robs you of the joy of both. So I know it's not easy, but I think, you know, how can you carve out time and how can you sort of create separation, which can be harder even when we're working from home. So my workspace where I am right now, I'm actually sitting in my bedroom at an ironing board. And so I don't have a desk, but the ironing board is great because I can put it away. And I think that's been helpful for me. It's like when I put this ironing board away and put my laptop away, like that sort of signals for me that I'm taking a break from work and I try to be focused on family. So I do think being present, you know, when you're working, be focused on work. When you're at home or with friends, like be focused and try to be present there. Maybe one last thing I'll say, I do think that there is increasingly an understanding that this like grind hustle culture is not helpful from a mental health standpoint. And I do think that founders, entrepreneurs are encouraging each other, and I think for like their companies as well, to be mindful of, you know, working more hours isn't necessarily going to make you more successful. So how are we being models for, you know, our teams, and how do we be models for each other to say, it's like, no, we're actually going to prioritize our physical health, our mental health, getting outside, going for a walk. I actually think that in the long run, if we want to build successful companies, we need to be able to access these like creative solutions, which like if you're stressed and overworked, I don't think you can actually do. It's easier said than done, though. I will say it's not. I'm talking a good game, but it's definitely an ongoing
So
journey.
practically, what do you do? Like, how do you make yourself to disconnect from work and get to go like running or something? Like, do you have schedules for yourself? How do you do that? Because I'm struggling with it.
Yeah. I mean, I try to do like a quick workout in the morning. I try to do like a couple, and it's I have like a low bar. It's like a 20-minute workout. So do you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like I can do 20 minutes. As I mentioned, sort of like just putting my ironing board away is a bit of a signal. I do find, I mean, this is maybe a bit ironic. I find having kids to be like a great like forcing mechanism, right? Not that that's like just what they are, but kids are demanding. My kids will call me out. They'll be like, Mom, stop looking at your phone. So, and like, I'm very conscious of like modeling for them too. I don't want them to be looking at a phone all day. So I can't be looking at a phone all day. So yeah, I think it's just, you know, carving out some of that time and being like, okay, we're going to play a board game with the kids, which means my phone's going to be away. I'm not going to look at it for a couple hours.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I have another question based on the answer to the previous thing that you were talking about, and it's around going into management. Like, I am at a point in my career that I'm thinking, do I want to step into a manager role? And I know it's going to be really like a lot of different things to learn, and it's going to be very challenging. And so one aspect is, can I do that? Which I'm trying to convince myself that, well, I can stretch and, you know, make it work. But on the other side, also, like, do I want to do that? Because it's going to be a lot of work. So how did you, in your own career, make that decision to go into management, and then also later on follow into entrepreneurship, and how those two align?
Yeah. I think one of the great principles within startups is a sort of like test and learn element, right? It's like, instead of jumping in with 2 feet right away, is there a way that you can test into it? and we've seen this with people who are thinking about management at Borrowell, is like, if you're thinking that this might be something that you would like what are some of the skills, or what are some of the things you're going to be doing, and can you like test into that a little bit? So maybe part of being a manager is managing people. What we might do is like set the person up as a mentor for someone else on the team, and like sort of have them be a coach. It's like, how does it feel to sort of do some of that coaching? Is that something you enjoy? Someone's coming to you with problems that they want your help solving. Is this something that gives you energy, or is this something you find like super draining? So, you know, that's like one aspect that you can test into. I think another, you know, might be, it's like, okay, if being a manager, you're gonna maybe be running more projects. And so it's like, is there a small project that you can run where you're working more cross-functionally with, you know, people outside of your team? So we would try to set that up for someone as well, to be like, okay, you're going to be in charge of this. This is like, you know, you're going to have to plan out the project, and again, figure out who the right people are on the working team. You're going to have to give updates to stakeholders and put together a presentation. And it's a bit of like testing into that. Did you like that? Was that exciting to you, or did you hate it?
Should I be like trying to figure out those opportunities? Like, how should I practically do that? Should I ask my manager to find these type of opportunities for me? Like, practically?
I think that's where it should start. I think is having a conversation with your manager to say, it's like, hey, this is one of the things I'm thinking about, and maybe you can be specific, and maybe they can help you think through. It's like, if I were to be a manager, what are some of the things I'd be doing, and you know, what are the competencies that I need to develop, and are there ways that I can do that? Because I think for us at Borrowell, we don't want to promote someone into a manager position if we've never seen them demonstrate any of the competencies that are needed to be a manager. We would want to give them some of these opportunities, as I've sort of described already, to say, it's like, how did they do with that? Did they do a good job? And then to have that conversation, like, did you like that? Did you, you know, maybe it was hard, but like, is that something you want to do again? Or are you like, no, I actually would rather focus more technically and go deeper there.
Okay. Thank you. I see there's a question there from Tina. Have you ever used an executive coach?
So I've just started using executive coach in the last couple months, and I would say it's been fabulous. I wish I had done it sooner, which is maybe what always happens whenever you do something. It's been great. I find it's been very helpful. Both my co-founder and I are using the same coach. And even though I didn't necessarily think there were like big areas that I had to work on, I definitely have found out there are big areas I need to work on. So I think that's been helpful. And it's been great having someone sort of like call you out on things, or the coach that I'm using will often give like suggestions of things to try out, and throughout sort of like the week. And just like to be thinking through like what's going through your head as you are like not talking in meetings. What are you afraid of? Like what's going on? So I think it's made me much more aware of thought patterns, which I think can be very helpful if you tend to be more of an action-oriented person, which I know a lot of entrepreneurs are. So yes, I've just started using executive coach, and I think it's been super helpful for me.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I was wondering if I could ask a question about gender bias and data. So I've been doing a little bit of reading about gender bias and sort of different ways to first become aware of it, and then to try to manage it in building your models. And so I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about whether or not that's something you guys have worked to avoid because you're a newer company, or if it's something that you're addressing through your work now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for us, both gender and other types of diversity and representation. Nice to meet you, by the way, Michelle. Hi. Thanks for having me and asking a question. There are definitely more questions. I think we're more at the question stage than at the answer stage. One of the challenges for us is that we don't collect information on gender or race in our sign-up process. Okay. And I do think that can be dangerous as well. I think it's like both from the point of view of like, oh, like, why are you collecting this information? Like, why are you asking my gender? Why are you asking like more personal questions? But I think what's challenging is without that data, we actually don't know whether or not there's bias that's being introduced.
Interesting.
So I think those are some of the challenges that we have is how can you collect data? How do you inform people why you're collecting the data, because I think it can get people's backs up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we, so I think for us, that's like the first challenge. How do you even get the data to understand whether or not there's bias in models are being developed?
That's interesting. So would you ever consider like using, I don't know, using NLP or something to sort of guess, well, to predict the gender of your clients based on their names or other data that you have, so that you could test out those theories? Or maybe that's because you don't collect the data to begin with, it's information that you don't need, and so you don't want to have it.
No, I think that's an interesting idea for sure. Is to sort of see whether or not you could guess into the gender, and we do have lots of information. I think some of the social media platforms as well will have information on gender, so it's possible that we could connect some of that data in and see, you know, whether there's bias there. Again, I don't know how accurate, but it's like some information. But yeah, I think increasingly just like the fairness and equity of the models that we're building are important.
Yeah. Neat. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question.
So I can also comment from what I've seen in IBM they're doing.
Oh,
like,
great.
there's a lot of, so similarly, the challenge that you are not allowed to ask their gender is like, it should be optional. So a lot of people don't respond to that. So in order to capture those type of things, at least like I'm now thinking like internally even about our employees and how, you know, who is getting promoted. You know, we see that the number of women in higher leaderships are not as high. So how can we make that more diverse?
Right.
The initiatives that I have seen happening in IBM is that internally they try to kind of like advocate this idea that, hey, people, even if you know, if you go and put that there, like the right messaging and then promoting this idea that your response to that question, yes, it's optional, but it's going to help us to do a more diverse, and this is not going to be used in the other areas, so that people can go and respond to that. So we have tried a lot of it from a internal volunteering and then diversity aspect to tell employees, hey, go and respond to that thing. And I personally was one of the people who, first time that I saw that, I'm like, okay, why do I need to put, you know, my gender and my preferences and like kind of like part of the LGBTQ community, all of those things as well, like any bias. And then when I got that messaging from our volunteering diversity teams and the whole diversity initiatives inside the organization, I was like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. And I went back and did that, and also told my colleagues and friends, hey guys, if you haven't done that with the same mindset, be aware that we are impacting the data that is needed to be captured to detect the bias.
Right.
And then it's also important that if you remove those columns of the data, the bias is not removed. Still, it might be there, but we just lose the column. So there's a lot of, on the AI ethics, there's a lot of work that is happening, and IBM is also part of that, in building explainability models or bias detections and things like that. So there's even like open source stuff that you can go and look it up on. It's AI Fairness 360, for example. It's like open source libraries that you can leverage in, you know, removing the bias. And this is a huge thing in the board, and it's like really like a lot of focus coming back to how we can, you know, have the bias data. Like first level, to Eva's point, we need to capture the data. How can we encourage people that we're not going to use it? Please give us data. And then secondly, now that we have the data, how can we reduce the bias in the models and the AI aspect?
Right. Yeah, because like if you don't have the data, it sort of prevents you from investigating whether or not there are differences when like other research from other areas suggests there might be. That's really great. Cool. I'll check out the AI Furnace. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I see that there's another question. How do you find opportunities in an industry that traditionally has been very male dominated? It's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, President, feel free to answer this question as well. I'm happy to start. So I actually think there can be some advantages. Maybe I'll start there, because I do think I have benefited in some ways from operating in a male-dominated industry. FinTech and founders, there just are not that many women of color, people of color who are founders in FinTech. And I think that what that's meant is I've sort of had more opportunities to be on panels, to speak, because, you know, thanks to, I think, a lot of advocacy, people recognize that having an all-male panel is not acceptable when people are putting conferences together. They want to have diversity of speakers. And there's not that many FinTech women founders. So again, I think I've gotten more than my fair share of invites to speak at conferences because the industry is so male dominated. I've definitely had the experience before where like people will know me because, again, there's not that many people who look like me. Whereas I might be in a situation where it's like, there's a lot of straight white male, brown hair, like, you know, medium height guys. And it's like, I don't necessarily can't keep girls straight. So, so there's definitely been some advantages, I think, to, you know, and hopefully some people have experienced that. I think that for Borrowell, we really tried to prioritize building a gender balanced team and a diverse team. And I think for us, that's been a distinguishing factor for us and for, you know, our employer brand and who we, which I think is like a great sort of virtuous circle of the more diverse people we have, the more diverse the company is, the more like, you know, different people want to work at Borrowell because I think it's, you know, hopefully you won't be an only, you'll see other people who look like you, and we definitely still have work to do. But I think we've tried very hard to build that into our culture. And at least at Borrowell, that like, you know, women and women of color hopefully don't feel like they're a minority.
Interesting. And so like another question, like to follow up to that is, how did you get to that level of success? Like, have you been in a team that has male, and I don't speak about only the latest company, even like in the past career, have you been in teams that were a lot of male, and how did you get to them? Like, how did you convince them that you are the best person for, you know, succeeding to the next level, like becoming the manager? Or, you know, how did you treat this? Because we see this, that women are usually, and I see this a lot, that women are like, I'm not sure until we are really, really like the best perfect fit. And then right away we see that our other male colleagues go ahead and get promoted and get to the next steps.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think there's a piece of research that showed when you look at job descriptions, and there were a number of job requirements, that in order to apply for a job, I think a man would apply for a job if he met 60% of the job requirements, but that for women to apply to the job, they felt they need to meet 100% of the job requirements. Which, when I read that, I was like, of course, like, you've called it a requirement. Like, if it's not a requirement, then like, don't call it a requirement. So I do think that there's an element where, you know, it's definitely a two-way street of like, you are like, maybe, you know, women and other underrepresented groups, do we not put our hand up as much? But I also would say there's systemic bias in society that exists for sure. I've been fortunate to, you know, have a co-founder in Andrew, our CEO, who believes very strongly in diversity and was not going to be one of those founders that had an all-male co-founding team. So it was important to him to find and build a diverse team, even from the very beginning, from the board and from the co-founding team. So I do think it's like, depending on where you're at, is it easier to like change your situation than try to work change from within? That was sort of up to individuals, I think, to decide. But yeah, I don't have an easy answer, I don't think, because it's a big problem. I feel like I've been very fortunate in my career. I do think also that part of being a co-founder and starting your own thing is you have like a stronger say in the culture, right? Or join a company where you do, maybe a smaller company where people are open to the whole team shaping the culture. You know, it's not like a giant company that's been around for 50 years where the culture is just going to be hard to move. For ours, it's like, we want people to come in and contribute to the culture that we have.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Michelle.
So there's another question from Helena. How have you managed your juggling with family, work, and other initiatives at the same time?
Yeah, I think as I referenced before, I think just having a clear ideas of what your goals are and what your boundaries are is really important. Again, this, it doesn't always work perfectly. I think when back when we still went out and had events and things like that, like one of the rules that I had was that I was going to be I wasn't going to be out more than either like 2 nights or 3 nights a week, in terms of like I wouldn't be working late, I wouldn't be at events, I would be home. And that was often like way less that I was actually out. But I did say it's like in any given week I will not be out more than 3 nights a week, and that was for personal things as well as work commitments. And so I think that was helpful. It's like if I was out, it was because I chose to be out and I shouldn't feel guilty. Like that's the decision I made. If I'm not happy with that, then I should just change my, I should change the rule. If 3 nights feels like too much and I'm starting to feel like that's not right, then I should change it. And again, I know it's like easier said than done, but for me, it was like, what are my goals? And what are the boundaries that I have, and then to like stick by those, and then not feel guilty about, the time that I have with my family. I'm not going to feel guilty about not working. This is time I have for my family. And there's always going to be more work to do that you can't get to doing. So I think for me, it was like having those times where it's like, okay, Friday night at a certain time, I'm not going to do work. And then Sunday night, I am going to do work. Like I actually like that time of getting into my inbox, clearing it out. And I'm not going to feel bad about that either. So I think there is an element of trying to create some guidelines for yourself and to be able to stick to them as much as you can.
Thank you. I have heard this in other women events as well. Like, don't feel guilty if you are spending the time with the family, because that you've decided, like, and interestingly, male does not seem to have that problem that much, but like female have that challenge a lot. Like,
I think
that the time that you work, and you are like all the time torn between the two words.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Anyone else has any questions? I know some of you don't want to join the videos. That's okay. Ask your questions on the chat. There's another question. What is the one piece of advice that you would tell your younger self entering the job force? That's a really good question.
Yeah. One of the things that I think I struggle with a lot is like trying to figure out like what kind of job should I apply for, and it's like wanting to have this like long range plan. I think the one piece of advice I'd say is like not to worry too much about the future, and just to like choose what you want to do based on like the choices that are in front of you. Because I would never have imagined, if I look back on my career, which is now 20 years, I would never have imagined all the things that I did, and I could never have predicted the path that I took. But I think what I did was I always just sort of like looked at the opportunities and I was like, which one am I most excited about? And I had a bit of like a framework that I used. As I look back, I probably wasn't as thoughtful about it at the time, but it's like, did I care about what that organization was doing? Was I going to work with great people? And would I like learn as much as I could? And those were the 3 things that I prioritized. And if I had those 3 things, then I would do the job. And again, I've like jumped around. My career has been all over the map, but I wouldn't change any of it. And it's gotten me to like where I am today. So I think if you're pursuing things you're excited about, where you're learning and you're working with great people, it will lead to more things that will check those boxes off. And so I think that's what I'd say is, and maybe one other thing, I think for someone early in their career, I would prioritize learning over everything else, because the title that you have, the pay that you have, that doesn't matter. I think that the more you can learn, the faster your career will accelerate and the more excited you'll be to go into work. So I think as you're looking at different opportunities, I would prioritize learning.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question. Any book recommendation on feminism or women in technology other than the popular ones?
It's a good one. This one isn't necessarily on feminism or women in technology, but I do think it's helpful. It's a book called Give and Take by Adam Grant.
Okay.
And the reason why I think it's connected is sometimes women are givers, and the author Adam Grant talks about how you can be a smart giver, or I don't know what, he doesn't say dumb giver, he says something else, but you can give in a way that like burns you out, or you can give in a way that is actually it will make you more successful. And I think a lot of times women have this, maybe have a tendency to be a giver, but maybe in a way that depletes themselves instead of energizing themselves. So I would recommend the book Give and Take.
Thank you. And there was a question that seems like a technical thing that it's now moved out. So I'm hoping that he's going to add that again there. I had a peek at it at the moment, which was, so in my understanding of the question, feel free to try to join the video and audio sanction. So do you recommend that we hire women, even though they might not be qualified, for the sake of diversifying it? Wouldn't this be, the other way around? Wouldn't this be wrong from an aspect of diversifying and being like fair and inclusive?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. One is that when we look at diversity, there's a couple of things. One is that we want to make sure that our hiring process is as inclusive as possible, that we haven't done things like put 100 job requirements into the job description, which will weed out women and people from other underrepresented groups who we know are less likely to apply. So I think that's, we want to make sure that the hiring process is inclusive, and we want as many people from different groups at the top of the funnel applying to the job. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to make that happen. I think secondly, when we're making a decision on hiring, I do think that someone, I think it's overly simplistic to say it's like, oh, are you going to hire the best candidate, or are you going to prioritize diversity? I think anyone who has like a hiring scorecard will know that the best candidate isn't always super clear. I think one example could be, do you hire someone who is like technically superior at today, but you think has, less runway? Or do you hire someone who's like a bit technically maybe not as not as advanced, but you think they've got like huge potential, and their like trajectory is going to be way steeper than the other person's? Do you mean like, which is the better candidate? I think it depends on the business needs, right? It's like, do you need this person to be able to scale really quickly, or do you just want that level and it's really important that they contribute from day one? If that's the situation, you want candidate one. If it's a situation where it's going to be fast moving and you've got some time to like train someone up, then I think you want candidate two. You want the person who has the most potential, who's going to be able to scale with you for a long time. So I do think that it can be overly simplistic to say it's like, oh, are you going to pick the candidate that like, represents diversity, or the one who's more qualified? I think the other thing I'll say about that is that like a lot of times the technical component can be learned, but what's harder to sort of learn are some of the soft skills, which are super important to us. I would also say there's a lot of value in someone bringing a different opinion in. So even if you had two candidates that say for everything else were exactly the same, I might prioritize the candidate who brings a different lens to the problem, because like if we have all these people who are thinking the same way, I actually want that. I want someone to challenge that opinion. I want someone to bring in a side of the problem that I maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to see. So
if you want to ask any follow-up questions, Sanction, please do that. There's a comment that said maybe that's why politics sometimes play a big role in hiring process. And he or she said, I'm good. So, and
yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to be very clear and have a very structured process around hiring. So like before you meet any candidates, like what are the things that you're looking for? Like what are really important? And then let's make sure that every candidate has the same experience, has the same set of interviewers. Those interviewers are asking the same question every single time, and that they're, rating the candidates on the same scale. So we try to be very clear that like, this is not about, would you have a beer with this person? Do they have like similar interests? That's not a factor at all. It's what are the competencies required to do the job, and who best meets those.
This reminds me that we had a woman hired for a position in our organization, like a director level. the fact that we all have our biases, I was the one that I was thinking, I thought that other guy who was more technical, he would have been a better fit. And this is like 3 years ago. And now looking at all the things that she has changed based on the new perspective, she might not have been as technical as that other guy, but she has improved this organization under her a lot with her new perspective, experience, and point of view. And sometimes we might have that bias on ourselves, like looking. And I remember at that time, other people in my team were saying, yeah, she shouldn't have been hired. She was just hired because she was a woman. But now I have like that better understanding of like why she was hired, even though, technical skills, she might have not been as good as the other person. So I guess like your point around like really what is the best thing for this organization? What do I need to make happen here? And all of the requirements for that job.
Right.
Thank you. There was another question here. Well, I cannot find the question. It's gone. Tina, your question was removed. Okay, what is one piece of advice that, that was asked, David. We talked about that. There was another question that was around, I'm sorry. Do you ever have a challenging time expressing the workload or level of stress to your friends, partner, or others in your life who don't work as a founder in a startup world?
I think there's definitely some challenges that like you either, your friends, partner, others, either they don't understand or maybe you don't want to burden them with it, right? Like not everyone wants to hear about your company all the time. I have a group of other founders, which I'm very thankful for. And that's like the whole point of this is like, so you have a group of people that you can go to with concerns or with successes that you can sort of celebrate. And we meet on, I think like every 6 weeks. And that's been a great thing. There's someone named Ben Baldwin who has put together these groups. There's like some training involved in terms of like highlighting the confidentiality and how can we support each other. So yeah, it's like group therapy for founders essentially. So
awesome.
That's So the follow up is it's called Founder City Forum, I think. I'll look it up, and it's been
that's amazing.
It's been great.
And this reminded me another thing that I had heard in a similar questions, not about founders, but you need to have a tribe, and that's like in any job. Like even for me, like if I'm talking about my work stuff with my husband, I'm sure that he's like, okay, enough about that. So you would want to have some people who you want to talk with them. And I guess in founders world, it would be more important probably. But
no, I think you're right. I think it's great for everyone to know that. It's like, you want to know, it's like, how does this work at your organization? Because people have experienced the problems before, right? And maybe they've got a perspective and they can at least share their experience. So I do think like, don't reinvent the wheel. Other people have probably encountered this problem before. And so I think it's great to have a group of peers that you can go to for advice. And sometimes even if they don't have advice, just to know that you're not the only person that's going through it, or you're not the only company that's going through it. Sometimes is like just comfort to know it's like, okay, this is totally normal. I'm not like a broken person for feeling this way.
Thank you. Anyone else has any questions? Please either put it in the chat or join, request that, click on the blue button and I can give you video and audio like Michelle and come and join and have that questions asked. I want to make sure that, we have still 10 people listening, which is really good. If you have any questions, this is the time you are here. This is the time of your career conversation. Really, come on. If you want to join with audio but not video, you can do that as well, like similar to how David is there. So you can just enable your audio and no video. Anyone else? So is there something that you want to tell us? Like, Eva, what would you tell us as like, these are the things that I think you guys should know, and then this is going to help you in your career?
Maybe I've shared this already, but I think it's like worth sharing again. I think just like the prioritization of learning, that I do think that in the short term, it can be easy to focus on the title or on like compensation for a role. But again, I feel like the more you can learn, the faster you can learn, the more you're going to sort of like maximize your value to any organization in the long run. And I also just think that like it's more fun, right? Like I think that's how you sort of prevent your skills from getting old, or being in a situation where it's like, okay, the technology that I've learned or the skills that I have are now like outdated. So I guess, yeah, regardless, like whether that's in your role or whether you're doing it outside of your job, I think just to prioritize learning.
One of the things it came to my mind was like the topic of compensation. How have you in your career asked for promotion, or like for your, like, how did you do that compensation discussion? Do you have like any experience sharing from that perspective? Like,
yeah, I'm trying to think if I've sort of more recently, there hasn't been as much a conversation about that because it gets decided outside of for founders. Often it's like a board conversation as opposed to something that happens earlier. But I do think being data driven is helpful if you can, and I think to have these like conversations openly with your manager. You don't want to do it all the time, but I think just to express like what your career aspirations are and ask for your manager's help. It's like, I do want to progress in my career. What do you think are the things I need to be working on? Hopefully there's some sort of, good feedback that you get from your manager or some sort of performance review process. But if not, then I would be proactive in those conversations. Yeah, I think it's like, it's, I guess what I'd say is if you're having those conversations at more of like a regular frequency, then it's not, I think it just becomes less fraught. You're not as like nervous maybe in having a conversation about compensation if you've been having regular conversations about your career and what you want to learn and how you need to progress. So I wouldn't recommend having compensation conversations all the time with your manager because that gets old. But I think just the conversations about how you want to progress your career and to make sure you're getting the feedback that you need.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much.
And so, David, do we have more time? Like, I don't know when we're gonna stop the session. This is really good.
I think we should probably wrap it up. I just want to be conscious of everybody's time, Eva's time. But thank you so much. This has been fantastic, really helpful. A lot of resources to go check out. I'm going to check out that book as well. Yeah, no, this has been great. Thank you, Farzaneh, for helping facilitate, and Eva for giving us more information at this time.
Thank you.
Yes,
very nice to meet you. A lot of learning. Thank you.
Yeah, great to meet you as well. Okay, thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. Bye.